and we're going live. Welcome to the Nalafem Accountability Series and our first webinar entitled Accountability Within, Starting With Us. My name is Sayed Areen Hussain, Project Manager at Nalafem Collective, and I will be your host. Nalafem Collective, or Nalafem for short, is a multi-generational platform of women, politicians, and activists striving towards the liberation of African women and girls. In Kiswahili and other languages spoken in African countries, Nala means queen, lion, and gift. As we wait for more people to join us, I see them logging in. We have a short video which we'd like to play for you.
Every great story has a beginning, a journey filled with passion and a vision for change. Let's take a look at the incredible journey of Nalafem so far. It all started in October 2020 with the organization of 5 regional barazas consultations. These consultations paved the way for the co-creation of the Africa Young Women Beijing +25 Manifesto. In November 2020, during the high-level Intergenerational Dialogue, the manifesto was officially presented to the UN Women and the African Union.
Africa Young Women Beijing +25 Manifesto, and with this submission, I submit the voices, the aspiration, and the hopes and the demands of young women on our beloved continent. And we share now the responsibility and accountability across generations to make sure these demands of Generation Equality Forum are taken into account and acted on.
Over the following months, Nalafem tirelessly worked to gather support. They collected over 10,000 signatures from over 105 countries, both online and offline. Nala Feminist Collective is a Pan-African group of women politicians and activists with a mission to bridge the gap between policy and implementation, intergovernmental and grassroots spaces, as well as generational gap. Their efforts bore fruit when 8 out of the 10 demands of the Beijing +25 Manifesto were adopted into the UN Action Coalition's Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action Compact from April to June 2021.
شغل حرية كرامة وطنية. Jobs, freedom, dignity. It has always been a revolution for economic justice led by women and young people.
On July 1st, 2021, Nalafem was officially launched at the Generation Equality Forum in Paris, France. Since then, Nalafem has been leading the way, organizing 6 intergenerational dialogues for accountability in August 2021 and embarking on advocacy missions to several countries. In July 2022, the inaugural Nalafem Summit and Awards took place in Abuja, Nigeria, under the theme, I Am Nala. This landmark event brought together advocates, policymakers, and activists united in the fight against gender-based violence and for gender justice. During the summit, Nalafem also launched their book titled I Am Nala, which shares empowering stories and advocates for the Sustainable Development Goals, the demands of the Beijing +25 Manifesto, and African Union Agenda 2063. With the launch of the Nalafem 5-year strategy spanning from 2023 to 2027, Nalafem is committed to advocating for accountability, investing in the socio-economic power of African women and girls, and elevating young African women into politics. To make a difference, Nalafem has devised flagship projects such as the Nalafem Academy, Nalafem Index, Multi-Generational Dialogues for Accountability, Nalafem Fund, and the annual Nalafem Summit. Through these initiatives, Nalafem aims to impact the lives of 1 million women and girls by 2027, nurturing an ecosystem for feminist transformation and amplifying the voices of African women and girls through various mediums, including activism and digital creatives. Also, in November 2022, Nalafem made its mark at COP27 in Egypt. They organized roundtables, supported African climate activists, and led a delegation of 8 young women to the conference. These dedicated activists raised their voices for climate action, advocating for a sustainable future. Alongside these impactful initiatives, Nalafem launched an inspiring podcast series. The I Am Nala podcast amplifies the voices and stories of African women and girls, shedding light on their challenges, triumphs, and aspirations. Nalafem's journey has been marked by collaborations and partnerships with organizations and individuals committed to women's rights and gender equality. We extend our utmost gratitude to our partners for their support. But the journey is far from over. Nalafem invites you to join the cause, to be part of this great vision and mission to liberate the African women and girl. Together, we are all Nala.
So as Nalafem, we began this journey on accountability in 2021. And from these discussions, it was striking that we were still asking the same questions and making the same demands that were expressed 28 years ago in 1995 at the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, as well as during the landmark drafting of the Maputo Protocol the same year. And so part of our work as Nalafem has really been to advocate around the 10 demands in the manifesto. And so accountability has been at the heart of our advocacy. So to know more, you can visit our website, and to drive this to conversations, let's use the hashtags #Nalafem Accountability and #CSW68. As we start our monthly series to unpack why, how, and what of accountability, we start within and hope to catalyze your action on accountability for gender equality by beginning with us as individuals and organizations. We will sit in conversation with parents, survivors, and leaders of feminist organizations to share why this work is important and how we can work purposefully to hold ourselves and others accountable. To lead today's discussion, I welcome our panelists here with us. Teresa Gakwa, Strategic Growth Director of Freely in Hope. Hi, Teresa.
Hi, Reem. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
We also welcome Catherine, Director of Programs of Athena Network. And we also have the pleasure to have with us Zainab Nasser, founder of Play Academy Africa. Hi, everybody. Hi, Teresa. Hi, Catherine. Hi, Zainab. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
So I have 2 questions for all of you. Okay, so not to put you on the spot, but where is the fire within you that keeps you alive for accountability work? And why does it matter? So that's my first question. And my second question is, how do you hold yourselves accountable? So just thinking that, we're really starting these discussions on accountability, beginning with ourselves as individuals who are, who play different roles and have different, identity, right? If it's parents, leaders in organizations, in our societies, in our communities, sisters, mothers, aunties, just the multifaceted identities that we hold. How do you, keep that fire alive? Where do you draw that fire from? And how do you hold yourselves accountable? And why is it important to hold ourselves accountable? So over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Reem and Nala at Athena. We're really excited to continue building on our partnership with Nala and all of you on the call. I'll start by answering your question on what keeps the fire in me for accountability. One is my personal lived experiences as a young feminist growing up in Nairobi, in one of the Nairobi's biggest slums, and just being cognizant that the inequality that feminists are addressing is still rife in our communities, and feminists have put themselves forward to challenge socioeconomic inequality, challenge the patriarchal structures that perpetuate violence, and just imagine and dream of a better world for everybody. And so it's accountability for that really keeps me fired up. And then secondly is the fact that by naming myself a feminist, I am also prescribing to the principles of accountability as a concept, really. And so in that particular sense, I'm also being mindful that saying I'm a feminist means I have to uphold feminist principles in leadership, in terms of how I engage with other feminists as part of a movement, as part of an ideology that I have to constantly interrogate and be introspective at a personal level. And finally is the fact that at Athena Network, we are part of a movement, a network. And so the need for accountability is such that if I take up a leadership role as part of the core team, I'm being a steward for resources, for programming, to make sure that the adolescent girls and young women across the various countries we work in, their lives are bettered. And this keeps me grounded. I think it's a very delicate role. To be a feminist leader is to be a servant leader without doubt. And so I keeps me grounded, but also keeps me accountable, because there's people who expect me to do better. And if I don't do better, then I'm setting a bad standard, and I'm failing them in so many ways. And finally, I think I'm energized because the feminists who we work with, they do such great work. And being accountable means providing platforms to elevate their work and to be in community and to be in solidarity with them. And especially for young feminists who rarely get resourced, who rarely get visibility, accountability means sharing and co-creating spaces with them, and co-creating future that we all feel like we are reimagining what that looks like. And that means I'm focusing more on leadership, because accountability makes people uncomfortable many times. We demand that from our governments, but we also need to make sure that our movements, our institutions, our practices are rooted in accountability at the personal level and moving forward. So that's a beginning of my answer. I hope that's helpful. And I also want to close by saying that we've had great feminists who've come before us, and they've really given us models to build on. And I think that also keeps the fire burning for me, because they expect better, and I need to do better, because it's not just, I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing this for those who came before us and those who will come after us. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'd like to direct the same question to you, Teresa. And Teresa being part of Freely in Hope, and just knowing, Freely in Hope having recently published Pendo's Power, a children's book. Could you just talk us through the same question? Like, where does this fire come from? How do you keep it alive? Why does it matter?
Thank you so much, Reem, and thank you, Nala, for this opportunity. Now, I came to this work maybe a little over 5 years ago after the birth of my daughter. And at that point, I became acutely aware of the world that I had brought her into. And as a survivor of sexual violence myself, I began to feel extremely helpless and scared, really, for her. And so in that process, I decided to move to the other side, where I would contribute in whatever small or big way toward building a world that is free of violence for Wendo, for other girls, and for the next generation altogether. And I think that two things that really keep my fire burning is, one, I want a safer, more equitable world for my daughter and for every daughter in Africa, in the world, really. And the second thing is, I see the dreams of the girls and the women that we work with in our work. All of us have beautiful dreams for a beautiful, equitable world. And I'm extremely compelled to support and contribute to the building of that world. And, the way I would say personally, I hold myself accountable is, one, by being in community. I think it's really easy to understand the theory and the policy level conversations around this issue of accountability. And I think what really grounds me is to be in community with the people for whom I am advocating, to understand what are their lived experiences, what are the issues we are handling every day, immerse myself in that, so that I'm never at any one point feeling removed or distanced from the reason for why we're doing the work that we're doing. The second thing is that I like to remind myself that the very thing that I'm advocating for, I need to live out on an everyday basis. And it can be in the small things. For me, as you've rightly put it, with like the book we've launched for Pendo's Power, for me, for example, parenting is a really practical way to do that. In the conversations I'm having with my son and my daughter, how am I practically passing down these ideals that are going to help build this sense of equality for them so that they can carry that forward in the future. And I think the last thing that I say would be really has been really helpful for me is self-care for sustainability. When you're doing this work and this work of accountability, it can feel oftentimes as if you're waking up every day to go to war. It feels like we're in a battlefield continuously. And I found that when I'm not conscious of how exhausting that is, then I end up being angry and resentful. And, it's easy to perpetuate the very things that we're trying to undo. And so being anchored in rhythms that sustain me as an activist, as an advocate, has been really helpful in anchoring me in this work of accountability. Sorry, Riam, you're on mute.
Sorry. Zainab, so over to you. Same question. Where do you draw this fire from for the work that you're doing? And so as a parent, as a content creator, now with Play Academy Africa, where does it come from? How do you keep it alive? Why does it matter?
I think my story is very similar to Teresa's, and it's in the birth of my daughter that even despite the fact that I was always aware that, the world wasn't kind to girls, to women, that kind of put in that initial fire for me to do something about it. Because when you look at kids, their life is happening right now. There's no thinking about the future, and their questions are now the way they challenge us and the stereotypes that we have. We also grow trying to unlearn a lot of the things that we've grown up knowing are wrong. So for me, it's always in looking at the little ways. So when I looked at her, I wondered, where can I start? Because it can be overwhelming trying to boil the ocean and fix everything. But like I looked at it at what are the little ways in which I can start within my home. And also like Teresa, I found a lot of strength in community and in looking at the people who've done it before us. So for my kids, I do look at them as not necessarily like a passive part of this world. They are very much active contributors. So what I do now really matters. So being a parent, an African or a woman, it just pushes you to depend on each other. And that dependence can be painted as a weakness, but really I think it's a strength. So the strength in numbers, in every volunteer, in every voice, like with the projects that we do, because we don't do it for ourselves. It's an idea that catches on and it stops being about you. We start doing it for each other, and that creates some level of accountability. So once you send it out into the world, like what we do with content, then you have to be accountable to actually make this happen. Once we put together our workshops, then as parents, we are able to create open dialogue and empower ourselves before we can empower kids. So being part of that community where there's a constant drive to do something in little ways, whether it's in our homes, whether it's organizing these things, truly has been the fire that keeps me going. And as usual, the kids daily, when they look up to you and you realize the amount of responsibility you have, that just, adds fuel to the engine.
Thank you. So yeah, like when we talk about accountability, and in so many ways in institutions and organizationally, the discussion about accountability tends to become a very technical conversation, which begins to seem almost unachievable, right? We start talking about the data in very technical terms, structures, and so on. But really coming back and just picking from looking at ourselves and hearing from your stories, accountability really is, even institutionally and from the government, really is just holding ourselves, recognizing that as individuals first, we are these organizations, we are government, we are the state, right? And so accountability is that simple. It really is, techniques and the ability to wake up every day to remind yourself of, why you're in this work, why you made those commitments. As Zainab said, just you making a commitment and being accountable that you have to fulfill it, is, in these simple ways is what accountability, when talking about accountability, is. So just a note to our audience and participants who logged in to the platform, you are able to type in comments or questions in the comment section, and then we will pull those up at the end during the question and answer session. So please feel free to interact in the comment section. So I have a question for you, Catherine, just speaking about, again, so accountability and now decolonization being a term that has become almost very technical and has begun to become, it's a buzzword. It is also has become, a little bit abstract, right? But Athena Network, having gone through, as an organization, having gone through a decolonizing process, if you could just, talk us through that and how decolonizing the organization and decolonizing the structure was, a practical, was a practical exercise. But how that fed into your process as individuals in the organization, but also as an organization itself to hold itself accountable.
Yes, I was on mute. Sorry. Yeah, so I think for Athena, it's been such an intense process, an exciting one. A feminist learning journey is what I would like to frame it as. Athena works within the global HIV response, as well as straddling the gender equality space. The global health framework, as we know it, is a very needs to be decolonized in the first instance. And for working within the HIV epidemic, we know that the burden of the epidemic is with adolescent girls, young women, and the epicenter of it is in Eastern and Southern Africa. And we really thought hard what that transition of leadership, of programming, of representation, of operation could look like for us. And we embarked on that journey very boldly with a lot of challenges and small milestones along the way. And that meant transitioning from our founding director, who was based in the US, to being intentional to have an interim director who's a woman openly living with HIV, much older, and who helped us to midwife the process at the time when we were thinking of how do we move to make sure that the folks who we work with, adolescent girls, young women in East and Southern Africa, see themselves represented within Athena's leadership, Athena's program management staff, board level, as well as in terms of how the resources are managed through the fiscal host that we have now. So we moved from having a US-based fiscal host, because moving resources from the US to the continent was not easy. We would have sometimes consultants not being paid on time, or activity money not being able to, not arriving on time, and such, small practical things that make work harder. And so that was successful. Now we are hosted fiscally by Arasa, who is based in Namibia, one of the countries where we work actively in, and also an ally in the HIV/AIDS space. So very much intimately understanding what we do and how sometimes the work happens. And then for the leadership transition, through our interim director, we went through a robust strategic planning process. And now we have concepts like feminist advocacy deeply embedded in our strategic plan as one of our priorities, as one of our key principles of doing the work. Shared leadership, movement building, very explicitly named as the focus of the work that Athena does. And I think it's towards finalization of the SP that we went on a very bold recruitment for an executive director through an open call, very boldly naming that we want somebody below 35 and we had, by that time we had also transitioned our advisory board that was made of experts. We still have experts now, but they're experts who are young women from the continent, from across the continent. And so we do have solidly the operational piece of it being Africa rooted and African based, as well as the governance of the institution. Now we have 85%, almost 90% of the governance board and the advisory board being adolescent girls, young women from the continent. And then also not completely discarding the previous structure, but integrating the previous colleagues who are in the board to continue with seamless transition, as well as support and feminist solidarity throughout, as well as making sure that the young women who are coming in for the board and membership and leadership are not feeling like they've been thrown into the depths of it. So it's been quite slow, supportive, and quite intentional. We are able to successfully hire a director who you all know, Ola, who's brilliant and amazing. And I think a lot of people fear change because we don't know what's on the other side. For us, it was, completely embracing the process. It was difficult. It wasn't easy because we still remain a global network, which means we do have individuals and members from the global north, but we are mindful that we want to be very intentional and accountable to the majority of the population where the work happens, where the resources are directed towards, and where the work is happening. And I think for me, having watched the entire piece of the process in terms of rethinking of our program strategy, leadership, as well as governance and operations, it's been exciting to see how what we're scared of is more of a learning journey. Number one, throughout the process, we lost our core funding, so it wasn't easy because most of it was unfunded work at some point, and we had to negotiate transition while also cutting back staff time and such difficult elements. But I will say that if I was to do it again, I will still take that journey because Athena is better for it. Athena is well positioned for it, and also I feel like now we have partnerships that people trust us, that we were very accountable with the process, public, some of it very public, and also just being mindful that you are challenging a structure, but then if you are rooted in the right principles, in the right frame of mind, you're okay. We feel like our work has expanded. We have much more trust and connection with the young feminists we work with, and more extensive. And we've also gotten to work with new partners like NALA, ETC, and other spaces have opened up better for it. So for me, as a younger feminist now, it's been a very fulfilling leadership journey. I think rarely people get to experience these kinds of opportunities in their lives to be part of such a dynamic process and learn so much from it while doing it.
Thank you so much for sharing. And it's really interesting that in a lot of these processes, and especially when we're talking about the Generation Equality Forum, we don't speak openly and very purposefully about decolonization and decolonizing structures and processes as that being a barrier to possibly why the needle, so to say, hasn't really moved that far in the last 2 years. And so it's great to hear just how decolonization really is as simple as just changing leadership, as one of the ways. Of course, it wasn't as simple, but one very practical way is to ensure that our organizations and who are part of our organizations are representative of the communities that we say that we serve. So over to you, Teresa. If you could just share, how do we ensure that we bring the human back to conversations on accountability, right? So the accountability processes so far with different dashboards on accountability are really statistics focused and data driven in terms of the numbers. But how do we bring back the human to these discussions, and how do we hold the government and institutions accountable for the commitments that they have made in a way that reminds them that these are people's lives that we're dealing with, right? And so when we're holding them accountable, we're really holding them accountable to ensure the dignity of people that they serve, but in a way that does not exploit their story and as survivors, doesn't exploit survivors at the same time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reem. And as a survivor-centered, survivor-focused organization, that's like a real thing that we have to deal with every day. I would say at an organization level, one of the most important ways that we bring back the humanity into the accountability process is by centering the voices of the very people that we are advocating for, and realizing, moving from power over to power with. So it's not so much that they don't have a voice or that we are speaking for them, because that speaks to having power over. It is power with, listening to them, to their voices, what they want, and then centering that, but also having survivors at the center of platforming these solutions and platforming these demands. So for example, for us, our organizational structure above the board is the community of survivors. So we don't do anything that is not for the benefit of our survivor community, and even our strategic planning, our programming, all of it is centered on the voices of the survivors, what they want to do, and they implement everything that we do. What I think, how I think we can carry this forward in holding the institutions or the powers that be accountable is, again, by having the people that are, I think I really like what Kit said, is making sure that the majority are represented in everything that we do. And so in the conversations that we're having, moving from the technical to the real and the practical bit, where it is the people that are most affected that are bringing forward these issues, and we're listening to their solutions, so that we are not always thinking that we have better ways of solving the problem and that they do not know what they need. And at Freely in Hope, one of the things that we powerfully believe is that the most oppressed have the power to become the most powerful liberators of the systems that have oppressed them. And in doing that, I think a really important component is ethical storytelling, storytelling with dignity, understanding that dignity is something that cannot be taken away from any one of us by oppression, poverty, or any other inequality, that is inherently ours. And that as we tell stories, we don't tell, that's why we use the word survivor, for example, as opposed to victim, because we are saying these are people, all of us were people that have come through extreme trauma, but we have leveraged the power within us to come out strong. And so being very appreciative of the power that lies within survivors, the power that lies within women, within girls, and I guess like highlighting that as opposed to making them and making us look like we're just victims that need people to exercise power over us, or to give us power, or to give us a voice. We've got voice, we are powerful. What we need are platforms for us to show up in our sense of power. And so storytelling with dignity, for me, I think is really core, and centering the voices of those people is really important. And I think as well, like if we talk about like future generations, I would say moving from just data and statistics to what are the real stories that are happening on the ground. As Zainab and I were speaking earlier, just the reality that we're talking about real children that need to be kept safe, that need to be protected. So always bringing that face of humanity to all the conversations that we are having, and doing that with a sense of dignity. I think that would be really important.
Thank you, Teresa. So Zainab, just jumping on that as well, that train of thought as well, as part of a community, right? So a lot of us, I think, on the call as well and in the room are, either part of organizations, working around some of these issues. But as part of the community now, beyond organizations, as young Africans, and as young Africans raising even younger Africans, how do you think every day we can hold ourselves accountable? And how do we walk the talk? What do you need from us for this to happen?
For me, I think as much as we've discussed that in a lot of the work that's happening right now, the statistics can be crippling and make it look like unattainable. On the other side, and especially when working with younger kids, I feel like equally crippling is this idyllic language that we use. Sometimes something like, this generation is the future, or it just sounds so far removed, or this thing that is whimsical that just happens. So grounding us back into looking at what exactly we can do, and realizing when we say that, for us, for example, when we say that parents have power, that it is quite literal in every single thing that we do in our home. Bringing it back to when you see your child mimicking how you're always on the phone, that is proof that everything that you do does filter down to them. So for us, moving into action, I think the very important thing is realizing that sense of community, because we all know that our kids do not exist in a bubble. So I can't do what I need to do within my home alone. Whether we like it or not, we do have to come together as parents and other members in the ecosystem. So whether it's other institutions or forming organizations like this, and as usual, also led from within, because that does create a sense of accountability when we have buy-in in the process. So for example, for Play Academy, it centers parents, it centers educators, it centers caregivers in general, to actually start creating action towards what we want to see changing. So whether it is within schools, whether it is in our homes, whether it is putting together play dates, or like our storytime podcast that we've put up. So on a micro level, this is how we do it. We first start by talking about it. You can't address something that, I mean, you can't create solutions for something that you don't yet understand. So for us, the first step is always talking about it, then looking at how can we collaborate to actually make this happen. What I've learned on this journey so far is that a lot of the times, an idea shared, that's literally what's needed. Like when you're in a room and you're able to say, this is the hope I have, or this is the idea I have of how this can change. When you don't have the tools, the likelihood that someone else within that room does have either the resources or the connections or the tools to actually help you is big. So for me, starting by talking about it to understand it and then sharing it is the first step. Then we partner with different experts. For example, we did partner with Freelin Hope recently for a parents workshop on, body boundaries and consent. And it was very evident from the parents who attended that they did feel a lot more empowered to start having these conversations in their homes. So even though we came together first as parents, not having the tools and not being able to clearly assign what the next step is, being able to partner with experts like Triza and hold our own workshops educates and empowers ourselves as caregivers first. So that is the first source of power. Then we opened dialogue with other members and organizations like schools and retailers. So first, once we've come together as a collective, we then bring this to the other spaces to agitate for changes, small changes within our schools, whether it is the kind of books that are there, whether it is, the respect accorded to kids and things like that. That's when you start those conversations within our own schools before we try and tackle bigger organizations. So for example, like I mentioned, in a quest to change the narrative and create access to diverse stories, because we had already realized as a collective that this is a space that we needed change happening, we recently launched our community storytime podcast, and parents were the main contributors. So whether they were volunteer readers, whether they were authoring the books, whether they were technical support, even our lawyer is a parent in the community. And within 3 months, just from all of us having a buy-in, that this thing was able to be converted into an actual product. So yeah, I think first and foremost, being able to form communities, it's really just about what we do now as a collective, how we hold each other accountable, how we then empower our kids to do what we are doing, because they do what we do. So showing them what's possible, and then we actually equip them with tools to actualize those possibilities. So we move it from this far away concept that just happens like a fairy tale to showing what's actually possible by doing the work.
Thanks, Zainab. Yeah, I think definitely there is this tendency for this work, and Catherine, you can speak to it as well as Athena Network, but to gatekeep, to gatekeep, some of to gatekeep gender equality demands and processes, right? As organizations have a tendency, with the language to make it sound very technical, that it's only feminist organizations that can be a part of it. Then as well, gatekeeping what a feminist organization is and should be, and things like that. I think it really is as well thinking outside the box and bringing in different organizations which make up our community. So thanks Zainab for sharing that. Just within that community there are lawyers, there are people who are part of the development world as well, but all united with the same objectives but with different language, right? So not in the same way that we do programming the call to actions, but in a different way, still doing the same work. So we're having this accountability series in the lead up to CSW 68, right? Again, a forum that has happened every year. that a lot of people are not necessarily aware of it because of the sort of gatekeeping that goes around it as well. So this year's CSW is centered around the theme addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. What one demand or need do we need to take forward, do you feel, as a community, right? So if we're thinking about ourselves as community now, do we need to take forward for this to be achieved, right? So just as a reminder, the theme is addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. So over to you, Catherine. One demand, what do we need?
I think in addition to the priority theme, it's important to note that for Athena, especially for us, there will also be the review of the girl child resolution that primarily is sponsored by the SADC region. And it's one of the unique resolutions that just focuses on the needs of girl children, but mostly from an African perspective. And it was introduced as a discussion to focus on HIV at the time. So for Athena, it's really important for us to make sure that we are carving out space for very context-specific conversations as to how post-COVID-19, as health systems have been reprioritized, the way we think about development has been, repackaged. We still have to keep the needs of adolescent girls, young women who, because we just had the pandemic come up, but doesn't mean that the other epidemics have been addressed, right? And because of inequality and because of a lot of these epidemics and pandemics are really a manifestation of how unequal the world is. We saw that taking shape with the vaccine equity issues during COVID-19, and we also know that if HIV affected everybody globally, there would be a vaccine. It's only because it's a very peculiar epidemic that mostly affects the African continent. And so I am, as Athena, I would hope that as young feminists, we can push our governments to continue having these discussions in a structural manner, in a way that opens up space. And rightfully so, as you've said, Rim, beyond the gatekeeping of organizations, also these spaces are very inaccessible. We know that for a long time, for a young African woman to travel to New York, the access to a visa is an issue, the travel support is an issue, the language used in the UN is an issue. And so it becomes the confines and also the shrinking civic space. Even if you're in New York, you're not in the right room. Partly because you don't know, or it's your first time, but secondly because, there's a preserve for the government or whoever should be in that room. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to keep building momentum towards CSW. I'm happy we're having these discussions early on now. For Athena, we are working on what our set of demands would look like, focusing on issues specifically like HIV, GBV, SRHR, because and economic justice and rights, because they still hold us back. And we have to constantly remind our government that realities have not changed. It's the same issues that women and girls and gender diverse persons are still dealing with in a much more unequal, in a much more globalized, in a much more lack of equity still continue to persist with us. And also now facing multiple crises of climate change, COVID-19, leadership crisis, all of it, right? Debt crisis across our countries. And beyond just the language, we also don't get to see young feminists as experts, even though we know we are experts, both subject matter experts and also lived reality experts in terms of what this looks like. And I'll just finish in terms of the poverty theme. I hope we can have these discussions with a much more sober political outlook to it, beyond the sanitized technical language that doesn't center human beings and how they live their lives. We know that most poor people are criminalized, for their existence is criminalized. It's much more expensive for them to access resources and for them to exist and push themselves forward. And so I hope that young feminists and all of us, Athena definitely will bring that forward. We can be much more honest and structural and provocative in terms of how we push our governments to push the needle. Because if it's the same agreed conclusions, then you have that done, then you come back, we have the next CSW, and then life keeps moving on. And so that's my hope for CSW, and definitely looking forward to having an outcome and a way forward that's more inclusive, more dynamic, and more representative of our lived realities, most importantly.
Thank you, Catherine. So we have one question in the comment box from Yasmin. And Yasmin says, it can be easier to be accountable as small organizations or networks, but how do we create systems of accountability that work for large organizations which are much more complex, and for governments and institutions like the UN and the African Union. So Teresa.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Yasmin. And I do see how that's true, that for smaller organizations, it's really easier for us to put in systems and structures that will allow us to be more accountable. And I do think, however, that in the same breath, it is the scaling of the same principle that would be more supportive for the bigger organizations or bodies. And I think for those, institutionalizing accountability is really key. It cannot be left to individuals to decide that we want to be accountable within those systems. We've got to institutionalize those. And that is including, like, when we create commitments, we have commitments. Those commitments must simultaneously be paired with systems of how are we going to be accountable? What are the timeframes? What are the goals? At what point are we going to review these things? And who is doing what? And how do we have continuous conversations that help us to assess how far have we come in achieving the goals and the commitments that we have made? I am not in a, like that space, except in form of like these sort of conversations, but I do know that it is possible, and for us to systemize those and to make sure that they are embedded within the very commitments that those bigger organizations have made.
Thank you, Teresa. So my last question to Zainab, before we have our final closing question. So Catherine just, spoke about these programs and, like the girl child coming up for review. It always strikes me as odd that while we're having these conversations about the girl child and children especially, we don't purposefully engage with parents, right? So this is either with creating policy around what we think young children need, or if it's creating content for them. I know that we've spoken at length before on just the content that comes out of some of these organizations, which are meant for the consumption or of children, right? And that itself, even just by the images, the graphics that I use are not very children friendly. But my question for you is, how best, or how would you like to engage? Yeah, so that's my question. How would you like to be engaged as parents, as an organization that holds and works with parents? How do you think would be the best way for us and different organizations that are watching as well to engage parents?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really drove me into this work, was one day realizing that truly we are always on the outside of all of these conversations. From when your child is in your belly to when they are born, there's always an expert on your child who is not you, from the doctor to the teachers to the government. And for sure, there is a need for us to be involved in the process. I think what Teresa said was really important in realizing that there is already an understanding, there's already power in our voice. Like a lot of survivors, it is the need for forums to be able to discuss these things. It is a need for forums to share our input and be part and parcel of the process. So I think for sure it is about also from our end being very mindful of what's going on and having an understanding of what the next thing we can tackle is, so that we also do not wait for invitation into these forums, that we either build them ourselves and we build these platforms for ourselves, or then we make ourselves known when we know that they are happening. So from your end and organizations like that, it would be to create those platforms, but for us it will be also to build some for ourselves. So if a door doesn't open, we break down a wall or create our own sort of situation.
Thank you, Zainab. So last question for all of you, Zainab, Teresa, and Catherine. What innovations or concrete example or case studies can you share, either from your country or your region or organization that you feel is effective on accountability, whether on gender, issues or other sectors that we can learn from and apply to accountability on gender? So innovations, concrete examples, case studies that you think are interesting for people to take a look at.
I can start. For the Athena Network, being mindful that we are a collective and we're a movement, we always try to root our work, accountability and otherwise, in that kind of system. And for us, we have, we work with young feminists across different countries, and our accountability to that, our accountability processes mean that we can conceptualize as much as we can as a team, but the implementation will be done by the young feminists. So from the word go, we co-create with them. And so, for example, for the political declaration on HIV that was being discussed 2021, working with them from the ground down to decide if this document was to be opened. And what I've realized, I'll backtrack a little bit, is that we underestimate the power of communities to understand the issues that affect them. I was in Tanzania last week and we were discussing a document that people would call technical. And in that room, I have honestly been in so many rooms, but I haven't seen people who are expert on the issues they were discussing as those young women. And so rooting our engagement in those kind of contexts. If we are going to produce a report as Athena, please, for us, we are very sure that it will be with the input and the contribution of all these young feminists in the countries we claim to have worked, because it's no use for us to be putting out content or report or advocacy asks if they're just desktop research, right? And so that has worked very well. We route this, we anchor this on our What Girls Want program, where we have focal points in country. The focal points work with a cohort ranging from 50 to 100. And so if we have an advocacy process, we will be like, for this country, what will be your priorities? They articulate what those look like. And I think we don't just stop at what are your priorities, right? And if this document was to be done, what is your measure of success? I think over time we've realized how best to do this. Both there are coordination elements, there are practical elements, there are support accompaniment elements. And for us, it's been a growth process to not assume that because Reem or Kate or Ola are the ones who are speaking to the donor, they are the ones who are the experts. So making sure that we center the young women that we work with and diverse persons in the countries, making sure that we are accountable to the process. I've seen people cripple down accountability because of the process and the overwhelming coordination efforts that it comes with. But I think it's also building in the time needed to do it properly as well. And so if it's established for us starting way earlier in October or September or August, not say that, oh, we didn't have time to consult, then you knew you were supposed to consult, so build the time in. So that has worked for us. We're happy to share reports from the What Girls Want program, as well as the She Learns as well. And really, we've produced magnificent documents, I will say, because, and I think it feels easier because it's a stewarded process that's rooted in the reality that we claim to have worked. So there's legitimacy and ownership if we put it out, and more people tend to use the documents that they feel like they've contributed to. So back to you, Rim.
Thanks, Catherine. So over to you, Teresa. Same question. Any innovations?
Yeah. Thank you, Rim. I think what I would say is having a more holistic approach to accountability. Initially in our work, a lot of our focus was on survivors and and response to violations that had already happened. Now, what happens when you focus a lot on just response, people tend to make that a them versus us problem, or, they're the ones that have experienced that. So then they are solving that problem for themselves. And as we did that, we realized that 90% of the girls that were in our programs had been violated as children. And so, yes, as much as it was important to respond to the issue of sexual violence, to provide survivor care and survivor support, we became very aware that it was extremely also important to have preventative conversations. And once you move to a preventative conversation, then it becomes clear to everybody that all of us have a role to play, because at the point that it is happening, then it is all stakeholders are involved. And so that's how we developed this solutions for addressing child sexual abuse. And initially what we had was just like a workshop that would teach children about, basic body autonomy, body boundaries, safe versus bad touch. And then the pandemic hit right after. And with the pandemic, not only were we not able to reach these children, but then they were more vulnerable and more exposed to the very violations that we were trying to prevent. And so we've realized that it is extremely important to come up, number one, with resources that are educating everybody, every stakeholder. I think about parents, I think about caregivers, educators, practitioners, government officials, first responders. Just the community at large needs to understand that we all have a role to play in ending and preventing these violations, gender inequalities, all of that. And so we developed this resource, Pendo's Power, which is a children's book that is teaching all of those things that we're teaching in workshops. But it is a resource that children can access even when we're not in person with them. But then that was paired with curriculum for parents and caregivers and practitioners called Linda Toto, which is Swahili for Protect the Child. And this is a process that is helping all the different stakeholders understand and own the fact that we are all responsible for building the kind of world that we're looking toward, having a violence-free world, a world where there's gender equality, a world where the rights of women and girls are respected, a world where children feel safe. I think a more holistic approach that centers prevention and response is really critical in this process of accountability.
Thank you, Triza. Zainab, any case studies, innovations that you'd like to share?
We are very young in this process, but I have to say that for me, I was pleasantly surprised at the speed at which we've been able to achieve a lot of the stuff that we've done. So at the moment, like Play Academy Africa, we curate enriching experiences. The whole idea is to find opportunities to not only just empower caregivers, parents and other caregivers, like in our context, in the Kenyan context, that we do have to rope in like nannies in conversations like the ones we're having. So looking at that and also creating opportunities for kids to thrive, whether it's play-based learning, play dates, or in the content they consume. The fact that the buy-in was pretty quick for me, it speaks to like the power of collaboration and a shared idea. So I would say that there is for me, it is more about the innovation in leveraging like digital technologies and seeing how you can have these conversations outside of rooms where you can do it, have digital resources that can be accessed, being able to mobilize digitally, being able to create access to stories for kids. So like our Storytime podcast, really, it's about accessibility. What we did find is I've been fortunate enough and have the privilege to be able to purchase like books off of Amazon or to source them in different ways to make sure my kids have access to these diverse stories. But a lot of the times the challenges for other parents was that like the major bookshops that are there, they pretty much had the same stories. So what we started doing next is getting secondhand books. So sourcing and curating secondhand books that show people of color, that show women, that show scientists, engineers, that create this world for these kids where anything is possible. But then another layer of that, which is a good-ish problem, is that then these books would sell out fairly quickly because there was a huge demand for them. So the next layer, which is this new journey we've embarked on, is now looking at how to look at how we did it in the past with African storytelling and turn it into a digital product that these kids can access, and making sure that we are very implicit in the kind of stories that we select. For example, we have a story about a footballer. It was very deliberate that the person doing the narration is a woman. It was very deliberate that we have a story about like a female scientist who is also African. It was very deliberate for kids to hear names and hear different accents from Africans. So I think in that way, moving away from the traditional way of doing things until this point has actually opened us up to a lot more opportunity to reach more kids to begin with, but also to rethink and to create new ways to tackle these problems. And it would not have been possible without like the input from all the different people in the community, and for them feeling accountable and being part of the process, that they would think up new solutions and share them. So for me, it has been the entire process of building this community that has shown me what can be possible if we come together.
Thank you so much, Zainab, Triza, and Catherine for sharing such valuable insights. So to end today's discussion, I'd like to ask Catherine, Triza, and Zainab if you could end with, I am Nala because... So Catherine, I am Nala because...
I am Nala because feminist power is what keeps us going, all of us.
Triza.
I am Nala because I believe in the dream of a violence-free world.
Zainab.
I am Nala because I believe there is strength in community.
Thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope that our discussion today has contributed to promoting the importance of accountability. Please join us in our next webinar on October 6th for our topic, Data on Accountability. Where is the money? Also, feel free to reach out to us on email at facilitator@nalafem.org to suggest speakers you would like for us to invite to the next webinar, or simply to share your feedback. Don't forget as well to follow us on social media and continue to use the hashtag Nalafem Accountability and hashtag CSW68. We will meet every first Friday of the month and can't wait to see you all next month. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.